I'd
No,
love to hear
you
more.
love him. Yeah, you're an anti-vaxxer. I know. No, I'm just joking. But
Call me what you want.
here's
I'm not
if
afraid.
you were on Twitter like I
Keep giving
was,
her compliments, she
wasting
said.
my time today, it was apparent to me that there was kind of a consensus amongst the people I followed, through the mistake that I'm making, the people I follow, that RFK did not perform very well today under the sort of withering criticism of people on both sides. And I'll start by saying this: there are two people in the Republican caucus who are doctors, right? And both of them laid into RFK Jr., which is kind of interesting. The people who are qualified in such matters were not on his side. You watched it. What was your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that first of all, there is such thing as various opinions from various doctors or various people who are observing the same thing. I think most people would agree that if you're talking about a serious medical issue, you get various opinions. I think the fact that we're demonizing RFK for having an alternative opinion about drugs, where they're acting like there's some sort of biblical truth around our vaccination schedule, and it makes them look much less credible. I don't care what degrees you have. If you are shunning debate over the efficacy or the safety of medicine, then I don't think that you're a very scientific person. And I think that that's exactly what RFK's point is and why he's become so popular. You know, there's a growing movement of mothers in this country, young mothers, and I'm proud to call myself a part of that movement, who are not anti-vax, and it's a slur that's used to discourage this very debate for a reason that I'm not really sure of, who are concerned with the fact that they are noticing things that are different among children these days. They are concerned about putting their children into positions where they don't have full information, not having medical autonomy, not having the ability to do informed consent. And yes, they see RFK as their advocate, simply not because they necessarily agree with him about his opinion about the polio vaccine or the MMR vaccine, but simply because he's saying, can we stop pretending that there's nothing going on? And can we stop dismissing concerned mothers who know their children as kooks just for wondering, just for asking maybe for more information, just for asking if there's been any changes over the last 30 years or whatever in the vaccination schedule and why? I mean, these are basic questions that the medical establishment has waved away. And by the way, sorry, but not to mention the fact that simultaneously they're also injecting children with quote unquote puberty blockers.
Dan Turrentine, I want to, before I go to you, and I think my representation of Emma Jo's views was accurate, but I want to go to you but you know, it's 4 o'clock. There's a lot of people that haven't seen this stuff. We have a reel of the sort of greatest hits of RFK's interactions in front of the Finance Committee today. It's SOT number 2. Let's take a look at this. And for those of you who didn't get to see it.
Mr. Secretary, do you agree with me that the president deserves a Nobel Prize for Operation Warp Speed?
Yeah, absolutely, Senator. That was phenomenal.
Let me ask you, but you just told Senator Bennett that the COVID vaccine killed more people than COVID.
Wait,
that was a statement.
I did not say that.
Okay, then let me ask, because you also were
Senator, I just want to make clear, I did not say that.
We'll check the record. That's a question of fact. You also said that you were also, as lead attorney for the Children's Health Defense, you engaged in multiple lawsuits attempting to restrict access to the COVID vaccine. Again, it surprises me that you think so highly of Operation Warp Speed when, as an attorney, you attempted to restrict access.
I think that parents should be free to...
I know you said that before. I do too.
To make their own choices.
So will they be just as free after these?
I assume they will be.
I will hold you to that, Secretary Kennedy, because this is not a podcast. It is the American people's health that's on the line here.
I'm going to recommend a product for which there's no clinical data for that indication. Is that what I should be doing?
What you should be doing is honoring your promise that you made when you were looking to get confirmed in this job.
You're going like this.
And that is, you promised that you would not take away vaccines from anyone who wanted them.
Well, Senator Bennett, this is a podcast, and I'm going to kick it to Dan. I mean, some sparks are flying, fists are flying. What did you make of it?
Well, I think it's actually a great opportunity for the Democratic Party to potentially have their first 80-20 issue. I think I agree with Emma Jo that there are legitimate questions to ask about what's transpired with kids the last 30 years. The challenge RFK has is he doesn't have data and there's no transparency on this. So he's trying to undercut all the science and all the data on all these other vaccines that have happened. And I think the issue is one of the great success stories of the US government the last 80 years is the public-private partnership between the government, universities, and pharmaceutical companies to produce vaccines that have saved tens, if not hundreds of millions of lives around the world on polio, hepatitis, measles is much more contained than it was, even chickenpox and things like shingles. What happened with COVID? There's a reason Trump called it Operation Warp Speed. They moved as fast as humanly possible to try to save lives. Were some people negatively impacted? Absolutely. Did they waive some of the protocols that would take 6, 7, 10 years to bring a drug to market? Yes. Were tens of millions of lives saved? Science is pretty clear they were. Did they alleviate strains on hospitals because people who had respiratory issues were kept out of them? Did it save money? Yes. Again, was it perfect? RFK, if he produced evidence and data, I think this would be a different conversation. But he won't. And now he's restricting for people who want it access to some vaccines. So for me, as a Democrat, I think it's great. As an American, it makes me sad what he's doing.
If we look at this, I think is Emma Jo right in a way? I mean, there was a lot of this stuff on vaccines, on rollouts, on efficacy and safety that was wildly overstated. I mean, we all remember the moments where we were told that if we got the vaccine, we could not pass the COVID on to anyone else. And that made us all free to go out. That turned out not to be true. The masking stuff turned out to be complicated and then certain parts not true. The social distancing was arbitrarily made up of 6 feet, et cetera. So there's some stuff that you got to admit that RFK probably has a point on. But what do you make of it in the broader sense? And, you see some of your progressive comrades like Elizabeth Warren going after him pretty hammer and tongs, pretty hardcore. What was your take?
I don't think she went after him. I mean, that's what happens when folks that came before the Ohio Senate from time to time. He's ready and I'm sure expecting sharp elbows. I think more than one thing can be true at the same time, and we need to be able to hold all of these possibilities and variables in the same space at the same time. I totally agree with Emma Jo that so much time has passed is always good, especially for social scientists too, but in the sciences, you are also supposed to go back and test and retest and to see what are the best practices for now. At the same time though, Senator Warren brings up a good point. If the secretary lied or overstated or changed his mind or is just talking, telling the committee what it wanted to hear to get confirmed, well, then he is going to have to deal with those very real realities. The science is clear that vaccinations have helped save countless lives, not only in this country, but all across the world. When it comes to the COVID vaccine, they were testing this stuff out in real time, the mask in real time. Will they work, not work, distancing in real time? Does it work? Doesn't it work? And we know a lot more now in 2025 than we knew at the onslaught of the COVID vaccination. And my last point, for people who want to use the COVID vaccination, parts of it debacle, parts of it successful, got it, get it, we'll admit it. But for those who want to use that as a blanketed way to say, never believe the CDC, never believe the science on vaccinations, they're at a path too far as well. And countless children are going to be put in harm's way if, in fact, this some can vaccinate, some will not, is able to go forward. Because we know with that herd immunity, I mean, you need a large swath of people to be vaccinated with any vaccination for it to be able to penetrate in a good way. But that does not mean, Michael, that we cannot question what should be happening today.
It's really well said.
Make the questions smart questions. That's my only that's my only caveat. Robbie Soave.
Have you seen a congressional hearing?
Can I just ask a question to our host?
Sure.
What's a non-valid or not a smart question for a parent of a 2-month-old, a 1-month-old, a 4-month-old, a 1-year-old? What's a not smart question for that parent to be asking their doctor? What's a stupid concern for that parent? Like, can I understand? Because I feel like there's all this shade. Oh, what a kook! Like, you're talking about a baby.
Well, you can talk about baby. You
How
can
do you
ask
dismiss
questions.
a parent asking it?
Okay. Well, I can answer. As a parent myself, no, I'm concerned about this stuff. I was concerned about this stuff when the vaccines were rolled out. I was appropriately skeptical of them, and I asked a lot of questions. I think it's a slightly different thing with RFK, is that RFK gives incredibly dumb answers. And so when you have somebody like both Dan and Nina have pointed out, the efficacy of the vaccine, I think, is beyond question at this point. Myocarditis, this stuff, does it exist? Absolutely. Was that stuff suppressed? Absolutely. Should it be talked about more? Of course. The question for the average parent, of course, is that should my kids at that age be vaccinated? I think that we were given a lot of nonsense about that because, we look at the tables and we see who's dying from this. 70, 80, 90-year-old people, that's almost everybody. If you're younger than that, you've got to be out of shape, obese, there's all these other factors. A healthy kid, should it be getting it? No. In the questions that weren't, they were asked, but that weren't answered by the previous administration and the first time around with the tail end of the Trump administration, those are deeply important questions and they should be asked. My issue with RFK is when he makes statements that seem to diverge greatly from the facts. And the thing, we were talking about this before we started about conspiracy theorists never just believe one conspiracy. I mean, the head of HHS has talked about chemtrails. This is kind of loony stuff. And you have to say that is kind of kook stuff. He's written a book that says HIV doesn't cause AIDS. These are kind of fringe views. And I think it's completely acceptable to point out these fringe views and what those fringe views, what effect they have on health policy, because those are important questions.
Well, and the allegation is that he is removing people who will not agree to sign off on things before they are done. In other words, he's cooking outcomes and telling scientists, you need to sign off for to give it credibility. And they are saying
that's according to corporate media, which he denied.
Okay, but again, perhaps they're all wrong, but they're all saying the same thing. And these are people who served, some of them in the first Trump White House. They've served under President Bush. They're not deep staters. As a rule, could be, Emma Jo, that they're all lying and Robert F. Kennedy is telling the truth. It could be. But to Michael's point, he then goes out and makes statements for which he has no data, no scientific review. And you have to ask yourself then, what is he doing?
I'm not sure. I don't really understand what state. All he's saying is, I want to understand what is going on with the vaccines. Not just the COVID vaccine, but the MMR vaccine and others.
He will not acknowledge.
And that's a question that parents are crossing. He has a whole movement behind him of mothers who are saying,
some of that is to clean up food supply.
I'm being dismissed by my pediatrician. I'm being dismissed by the CDC as a conspiracy theorist. Meanwhile, I know my kid, one day to the next, they're staring into space. And nobody is giving me an answer about why. To say that the autism rate in the country hasn't shot up in the last 30 years is gaslighting.
Well, see, that's where I disagree with him most strongly because, again, he doesn't. I don't believe that if he commissioned a study and had it with all his people and they reached the conclusion that the vaccines have nothing to do with it, I don't think he would accept that answer. This has been his hobby horse for years and years. Exactly. It's what he fervently believes, and it verges on religion. And I say that as someone who's very sympathetic to a lot of the things he says and a lot of the things he does on other matters. The issue, I have no problem with him saying that the COVID vaccine, separating that from the others, saying that, Elizabeth Warren, how dare you? You promised us you wouldn't change anything about any vaccine. Well, like even experts now mostly agree that this is not, to Michael's point, a necessary medical intervention for otherwise healthy children and adults. Antibiotics are a good thing, but we don't just let anyone take them under any circumstances. We don't like mass give them to everyone. You have to get a doctor to prescribe them because they say you have that thing and we're going to give it to you. The COVID vaccine for otherwise healthy people working that way is, I think, pretty uncontroversial. And you got to separate that put that in a different category. And then on all the other things, he's still maintains that the measles vaccine is important to get and you should get it. He said that. I know some people don't think it was a full-throated enough endorsement. I think it's his, but he does have I think defenders of the COVID vaccine tend to overstate the benefits to everyone, and then its detractors tend to overstate the harms.
But can I just, I mean, I just,
also, I want to get,
Mike,
Nina, just quickly, because I want to get to somebody whose first name is your last name, someone who's been
yeah, I saw that. Just quick, I mean,
go ahead, as long as you make it quick.
Quick, I mean, we being the nation and the world, we're drinking out of a fire hose. I just want us to remind, it's very easy for us now, being the Monday morning quarterback, about what was going on when government intervention had to take place with the outbreak of COVID. I just want to remind us of that. Yes, were lots of mistakes made. Are things true now that were not true then, or vice versa? Absolutely. But we cannot forget the sense of worldwide urgency that was going on when the virus first hit.
And, we can have another show, too, about the lack of trust in institutions and how we are all responsible for that in our ways, being within the media and all the things we've screwed up to make people not trust experts, including scientists. Okay, out there in the 2A community, is it Turner? Is it Dubois, or is it like W.E.B. Du Bois? Turner,
you're muted.
Oh, am I good?
Yes, you are.
I think it's actually Dubois, and I think he actually said his name Dubois, but maybe there was some confusion later on.
Well, yeah, Mr. Dubois. Then, what do you got to say for yourself?
Well, so I'm an RN, and also I'm going to be an NP in about less than a year. So this is something I'm very passionate about, and I loved when like Dr. John was on and stuff like that. It's been a huge, topic for me. And I really love what RFK is doing. There's real issues with the vaccine, and there's actually Dr. Marshall that raised a point with the Hep B vaccine that actually the issue is we should be testing. For women that don't get tested and that are at risk, like IV drug users, other multiple partners and stuff like that, then those are the ones we should screen and we should give to them. For people that aren't at risk, there's really not a good indication for them to have it, except for it does prevent hepatitis C, I believe, later in life. So there was a physician on his side. There's 3 physicians on that committee, as well as in the Republican caucus, and so one did agree, and he's an OBGYN. So,
and where are you based, Turner?
Tennessee.
Oh, okay. And is you said you're an RFK? You support the kind of the Maha movement and what he's trying to do?
Yeah. So my background, I'm Adventist, and so we're very like health minded, and so this is something we're very passionate about as a community. And so we like it. I mean, I don't agree with him always. Like, I think the vaccines have done great stuff. I mean, I think there's good science for that. But I think this religious dogma that comes with science and the experts is really bad. Like, I think, we should have a collaborative relationship with our patients to make decisions. And when you're trying to tell them what they should do and trying to force it upon them, I think you really negate the trust that they have in you.
Turner, I appreciate the comment, and as somebody who's probably the most skeptical of RFK here, I agree with you that we call that scientism, the idea that nothing can question the holy science, and that has caused endless numbers of problems. And I can give a number of examples that predate COVID and the COVID vaccine. But I also wanted to talk a little bit about the politics of this. Dan mentioned it, so why don't I go to you, Dan? Of the 1,000 people within HHS who said, we are going to walk out, and the former CDC director who was fired and said she was forced to resign and refused to resign and was fired. Let's talk a little bit about the politics of this. Politico today had a story about Republicans. I don't really trust this story, by the way, that Republicans are souring on RFK, and just mentioned the 2 senators that I previously mentioned. It doesn't seem like there's a groundswell within the party about this. As far as the politics of it are concerned, What do you make of that? I mean, within the CDC building, this kind of tumult seems unprecedented. I couldn't find a previous example of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure the country necessarily will feel sorry for HHS workers leaving. Like, I think trying to defend the bureaucracy is hard. I also think the MAHA movement is real. I think cleaning up the food supply is a very popular issue with a lot of people across different communities. But I think that generally speaking, most Americans believe in science and most Americans believe in vaccines. And I think most Americans believe what Nina said, which is COVID didn't get it all right, but when the fire hose was blasting, they kind of tried to do the right thing. And I think MAHA is about 3 to 5% of the electorate, or I'm sorry, RFK's coalition is 3 to 5% of the electorate. It was huge for Trump. Huge problem. We lost it. But sometimes people confuse that movement with the big majority of this country. And I think it's the first time I've seen, I think Trump knows, and the reporting is the White House knows, they've got a problem. They need MAHA. They need it energized for the midterms, which they're desperate to keep the House. But they know they may be on the wrong side of an 80-20 issue for the first time. And you're hearing Republicans privately say, we got a problem. So as a Democrat, I say pounce. Hammer it home. Transparency and accountability. Keep hammering it. I think the politics are on our side.
Yeah. Dan says hammer. Sharon out there in 2A land, who has her hand up. What do you say? Dan says hammer on. And I suppose you have a question too. You don't have to just comment on Dan's political ideas. So
let's chat, Sharon.
Okay. I'm going to try not to be nervous and get this out succinctly. I worked in healthcare for over 20 years, OBGYN mostly, and then some pediatrics. The CDC has lost really a lot of public trust since the advent of the internet. That's when I started in healthcare. And when all the blog posts of Jenny McCarthy, what do you think's going on with my kid and autism and vaccines? The government really sat on their hands and didn't do a whole lot to countervail what was starting 25 years ago on the internet. And that's a government problem. Currently, though, if a parent comes into their pediatrician and wants to have a long conversation about what do I do? How do I vaccinate? What's the best thing for me and my child? Those doctors don't get paid to have an hour-long conversation. Insurance doesn't cover a sit down. So the parents are handed these CDC brochures with cartoon pictures of vaccinate, vaccinate. And you've got a whole internet full of podcasts and other information that might not be helpful. So I think the government in some ways is messing up, that all they're saying is you must do it, but they're not giving parents adequate information. And if insurance companies aren't going to cover a vaccine appointment, I mean, these parents and appointments, it's 10, 15 minutes. Spit out all the questions you have about your kid and move on to the next one. The next topic, though, was one of the doctors that recently quit, or a scientist that quit from the CDC. He was being interviewed and he was talking about the Hep B given to newborn infants in the hospital. And the disturbing thing that I caught on that interview was, he said, for a patient that had prenatal care, they test the mother, they can find out if the mother's Hep B positive, probably don't need to give the newborn infant Hep B, but they're worried about the patient that doesn't have any prenatal care. And so the way he said it actually was, we only get one bite at the apple, so we need to vaccinate that kid. And I'm thinking, nobody delivers in 10 minutes and they're kicking them out the door in a half hour. There's enough time to run a blood test on somebody that's had no prenatal care, Sharon, to find out if they're Hep B positive.
Let me ask you a question, Sharon. First of all, you shouldn't have been nervous. You did fantastically. I think take any of our
No.
jobs. Wonderfully done. Second of all, I mean, it seems like in a way that you're talking about sort of broader problems with the healthcare system, right? And I think that that's often what
That's a
happens
big
with RFK,
problem.
whether you agree with him or whether you don't agree with him, whether you're conservative, liberal, Republican, or Democrat. A lot of that sort of fear and distrust of the American healthcare system and, disaffection with it is channeled through RFK. I assume that you support RFK and supported him in his mission. Not necessarily.
I understand where he's coming at. I mean, I was born in 69. I did not have 9,000 vaccines before I hit first grade. I mean, the schedule that they're giving kids now is a lot of shots. A lot of times, like a 6-month-old might get 4 different shots at that one appointment. And some parents are like, should I spread this out over the next year? There's a lot of questions and a lot of problems with our healthcare system because doctors are pressed for time. It's a business. Even if it was Medicare for all, it's still a business. And the other problem is if the CDC doesn't recommend COVID for ages 2 days to 100, insurance companies say, well, it's not recommended, so we're not covering it. There's bigger problems that hating RFK or saying all vaccines are good still doesn't fix the problem that if parents have questions and either want to delay or want to do something different, it's our healthcare system that's screwed up.
I think that's probably
And
now
that's
a bipartisan issue that people, I mean, Republicans used to spend a long time defending bad healthcare policy because they thought, in the interest of the free market, et cetera, which it was not in the interest of, by the way. But I want to actually bring Robby in here, and you guys can all jump in because it's a question for all of you. And I start with Robby for one reason is that I've seen Robby write about this. And this is always a question of information. Who does one trust? I mean, Emma Jo mentioned it, like your doctor's saying this, there are people who have different opinions on these things. We are in the media. And Robby, if somebody asked you, well, there's a lot of information out there. Who the hell am I? I don't have any expertise. Who do I trust?
Right. And the reason, we're having a lot of these conversations is because people deservedly, as you pointed out, don't trust the CDC. I mean, put the vaccine issue aside for a moment. I sometimes think the vaccine issue is the shiny object when there's so much other guidance from the CDC that I wrote about during COVID and so many others did that was you talk about the science being politicized under Rochelle Walensky, the Biden's second CDC director. She's cherry picking studies that ended up being junk studies to justify putting masks on 5-year-olds in kindergarten to a degree. We masked kids more aggressively than the WHO recommended, than European countries recommended, and we had worse health outcomes. And they were doing that for political reasons because the teachers' unions were putting pressure on them to justify having school be as miserable for kids as possible because that was the political agenda of that organization. And so to say that now it's politicized is not the lived reality of a lot of families and parents during COVID. I want that properly vetted. I care a little bit less about just getting to the bottom of RFK Jr.'s personal 40-year-long hobby horses about vaccines. Yeah. That's stuff that families want answers to.
Yeah, the Rochelle Walensky thing, by the way, I mean, you lose trust. And I remember this very vividly. I don't remember the exact phrasing of it, though, that she said, I think it was on CNN, that we were on a precipice of some sort of disaster that was coming around the corner with a new variant of COVID. And when those things end up not happening, the trust craters even further. Let's bring in John from the two.
Well, I think, though, but the challenge with that is like when you go into hospital, doctors wear masks. When they perform surgery, they wear masks. Why? Masks do serve a real function. There's, why the masks were not as effective around the world, because it turned out you couldn't ask people to wear a mask 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all day. That turned out to be unsustainable. So, I mean, you do have to go back to, again, like at the time, they were trying to figure out a way to do so. Even Florida shut down at first. Even the mighty Ron DeSantis at first shut down Florida. Nobody knew.
Well, but that's because they said we need to shut down for a small amount of time to get our hospitals ready. And that was the selling point. And I said, okay, sure, fair enough. And then they being the expert health advisor government people said, actually, we're going to just keep everything shut down until the vaccine's available. But we're going to do it really fast. And then the vaccine was available. And they're like, actually, we're going to keep things shut down until a significant number of people get it. Actually, we're just going to keep it shut down forever.
But that's the fog of war. I mean, it just is. Oh. It is. It's everything in life. The fog of war happens. Yeah, I don't think the deep state sat there and thought, how could we screw Republicans? Like they didn't.
I think some of the criticism from myself, and I know Robby and Joe too, would be the kind of assurance that people gave you that this was right, because the fog of war is true, but you have to present that stuff with a measure of skepticism and saying, we don't exactly know, but here's what we're recommending. And that didn't always happen. Okay, John.
And then you have to say where you're wrong. Yes, or you were wrong.
That's why I said Truth and Reconciliation Committee on COVID.
By the way, the phrasing wasn't "we're in the fog of war," just to make sure we all remember it the same. The phrasing was, remember those stupid infographics that they had of a person talking, and then it was showing like spit particles like blowing into the face of the person they were talking to. And that was somehow like supposed to convince us to stand 6 feet apart and wear the masks and all that. It was all pure nonsense being billed as this is a safety precaution that we are now forcing you to take.
Well, they thought it was in contact at first.
Let's
I do want to get to John, and the reason
and he's Dr. John.
Because he's wearing OR scrubs. So he might have just bought those down at the shop and trying to trick us. But John, I presume you're a doctor.
Two-way celebrity.
No, Dan knows me. I haven't been on this show before, so it's nice to meet everyone else for sure.
The man.
I have a lot of thoughts. So just real quick, I'm a registered independent. I voted for Obama twice. I have some regrets about that. I've never voted for Trump. And I have a lot of feelings about Maha and RFK.
You're a Harvard-trained lawyer. I mean,
I'm not a lawyer. I am a Harvard-trained physician who is still a pediatric anesthesiologist, and that's why I'm wearing scrubs. So first of all, the masks in the OR, there's actually evidence that the anesthesia team doesn't even need to wear a mask. It doesn't affect infection rates, but that's a particle size thing. Bacteria are much bigger than viruses. There's no evidence that the mask prevented the virus or any real respiratory virus. So there's a clear difference on masking there. So many points here. But so JAMA had a big article come out that showed trust in physicians declined between 2020 and 2024, well before RFK was in this administration, dropping from 70% to 40%. The decline in trust in physicians has been ongoing. COVID accelerated it, but it does come back to the point that a lot of people have been making here of presenting fact when it is the fog of science, not even the fog of war. The fog of science is that you don't know, and we do not like to say, I don't know. I can say that as a physician who has seen countless patients come in with chronic pain, with other things, and we don't say, I don't know what's going on. We say either you don't have the thing that you're saying you have, or your symptoms aren't real. People have stopped trusting us with largely good reason. Look at what happened with peanut allergies, with Vioxx, with opioids. So many things in the past decades that led up to COVID, which was pouring gasoline on a fire. So that's one thing. I would desperately love to have this conversation be entirely different than it is right now, not through political lenses or partisan lenses, but through parents on both sides who deeply care about their kids. As Emma Jo said, I think the parents of kids who, for whatever reason, had a vaccine and something changed, I think we should believe them. And I really wish we could completely change the whole conversation around vaccines and think of it as any other intervention. Is the immune system forever mutable without any adverse risk, right? I think all my kids are vaccinated other than the COVID vaccine because they're young and healthy, as Michael said. So this is nothing to do with being anti-vaccines. The vaccines for smallpox and polio, the early vaccines, the technology could not be more different than the technology for the COVID vaccine, for mRNA technology, which is a whole other debate. But to say vaccines is just a monolith is just it's not scientifically accurate, right? The technology is different.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, this is absolutely
For
fascinating.
sure.
John, you are amazing, by the way.
And I'm totally fascinated with this idea of COVID as an accelerant, but I was, largely unaware that trust in the medical profession was collapsing before that, and all the examples you say accumulate into.
Yeah, actually, Marty Makary wrote a great book about this well before he was on the radar for this administration, and he was sort of an equal opportunity critiquer of both of all prior administrations. So yeah, this concept has been around for a while.
So what do you say to a patient or to a parent who says, I don't believe the dominant view in science about autism? Because, let's bring this up because RK was asked about it today.
Yeah.
And, you have people, a book called Do You Believe in Magic by this doctor who's written a lot about vaccines and says, all of these people are bananas. Every study shows that autism and vaccination are not correlated. There's a lot of people that come out there and say that, like doctors. I mean, this guy's a guy at Penn, I think. Do you tell people that is sort of 90% of science? But how do you deal with somebody who thinks their kid's autism was either caused or accelerated by vaccines?
Yeah, sure. So I, as a pediatric anesthesiologist, I'm not the front line for having this conversation, but I have a nephew who has autism. I think about this all the time. I have a 3 and a 6-year-old. And as a parent, more than a physician, I think about this all the time. Here's a brief list of the things that have shown to have some association with increased autism risk. Prolonged NICU stays, parents that are older, having exclusive formula feeding instead of a mixture of breastfeeding and formula or breastfeeding alone, antibiotic use early in age. So as parents, people have had kids older, on average, more kids have survived that weren't surviving previously because of excellent NICU care that requires prolonged antibiotic use sometimes. Could, in a small percentage of kids who have 10 other risk factors, could an intervention like a vaccine that causes an immune response, and autism is thought to be some sort of neuroinflammatory process, could it tip the balance in a small group of kids that have a million other risk factors? Maybe. It's certainly plausible to me, but that's not the conversation that really anyone is having, right? It's, does the vaccine cause autism? And obviously that's way too simplistic of a framing, because it's just not even plausible that every kid doesn't have autism and every kid's been vaccinated. So, but is it, like most other things in life and in science, an accumulation of risk factors that could, this thing tip the balance? I would love to believe someone like Nicole Shanahan or other parents who have noticed that and try to figure out why. What about your kid could make that potentially plausible? And I think that's a reasonable conversation to have in a world where, can you also just add as many vaccines as possible, not as possible, but forever add vaccines without having other effects on the immune system, like more colds, more allergies, more eczema, more autoimmune disorders? Like, that's a reasonable question to ask. These are all,
John,
these are all correlations. They're not causes because we don't study science that way. We try to get rid of things that are, confounding, but life is just confounders. Like,
John, I want to
makes no sense.
Reject this nuance because we can't get it into a clip.
I understand that, and that's what I hate about.
So if you could just say it does or does not cause.
This is the only place that nuance is even possible.
Know, that's what we try.
Still not enough time.
It's awesome, though, John.
I want to get Nina in here because I think this is one of those conversations that is talking about a bigger issue. And thank you very much, John. Very smart. But this idea of a lack of trust in institutions, we often thought it was just about politicians and then just about people in the media. And it's broader than that. Do you understand? Because I'm trying to kind of get myself to understand a lot of this stuff of why people bring that so far as they don't even know if they can trust their doctors or medical science that is coming from the government says, we are the government. We're telling you this is what you should do. And this is what the recommended X, Y, and Z is for your child. There's just, a total lack of trust in all institutions these days.
The erosion has been happening for quite some time, and there's a connection between all of these realities, all of these pillars, I would say. There is a connection to the political pillar, to the social, economic, medical, all of these things, and the type of propaganda, and whether or not the fourth estate that we all pretty much depend on to give us what the realities are has really turned into mainly just the fourth estate with a lot of people giving opinion and not so much laying out the facts as they understand them and then allowing people to figure it out. I also believe the 24-hour news cycle contributes to this. Anybody can front as an expert because of social media. Social media is both a blessing, but on the other side of that, it could also be a curse, especially if you have people out there who really don't care whether or not they're given misinformation. And this is all political. If I just say to the two-way community, as much as we want to parse out and pretend, it all is political ultimately. Now, how we handle it doesn't have to be partisan, but all of this is about politics. And it really is a shame that it has, I don't even want to say it has come to this, because maybe it's always been like this, but because we have more access and the world is a lot smaller because of technology, our awareness of what each side is putting out there. Eroding trust in institutions is not necessarily a good thing, ultimately, if it causes people to be skeptical about everything. But the educator in me, people should always question. We always should seek new knowledge and new information. What we know to be true today might not necessarily be true tomorrow or the day after that. We got to keep an open mind. And there are some areas, and I believe that vaccination is that area, things of global health. Because, one of the conversations that came out last night is that when we talk about vaccinations, in a certain way, we give up the I for the we, because we're trying to increase the lifespan and the livelihood of the greatest number of people possible. Now, even if I put that in the parking lot, there are certain things in our society that we all should be able to come together and have the type of conversations that we're having right now on two-way, and not make it about who's the Democrat, who's the Republican, who's the Libertarian, who's rock and roll, who's little country. This really should be about the preservation of life, people being able to live out their greatest greatness as healthy as they can be. And then we should be able to question what is happening now without people delving into, total conspiracy. So, Michael, that was a long way for me to say that human nature itself, coupled with all of the tools that we have at our disposal, I think is stirring up a lot of skepticism. Some of that may be warranted and some not so much.
Can I just
philosophical Nina Turner? Emma, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I think Nina actually 100% got to the crux of this. And I think that it actually ties together a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about up until this point, which is, yeah, it's totally political. And I think the political point that's being hashed out right now is and Turner, so Nina and Turner, not Nina Turner, both touched on it. Like, Turner said what I think the political point is, which is science has become within the scientific community or the scientific establishment or the medical establishment, the science has become this kind of biblical truth. And all these resignations, Dan brought up, are they all wrong? It's not that they're all, it doesn't matter what exactly they're arguing about. What they're arguing about is only, are we trusting the science, the Bible, God's word of the medical establishment, or are we questioning it? Or are we taking a second look? Or are we not accepting it as necessarily objective fact just because the expert says so? And that's the beef with RFK. That's what the resignations are about. That's what all of this is about. And what the MAHA movement is about is only this political point, which is not we're anti-vax, not we don't believe anything anymore, but just the rejection of this supreme truth of all the things that the medical establishment says. And yeah, it's absolutely political. Especially, I think, and I would actually lean into that. Who are these people? They're like concerned parents or whatever. You know what I mean? These are not scientists. They're people who have their own health orthodoxy or their own ideas about things, or who are just noticing that the food supply is disgusting, that the medicine is way too frequently and liberally distributed, that it's not that great quality, actually. It's extremely expensive, that the pharmaceutical industry is all over the place in the media.
Well, but now you're going
all
to
over the place in the
issues.
Government. And they're willing to ask, wait a second, can we pump the brakes? Not necessarily on anything specific, but on more just generally. And then you have another side that's saying, no.
Well, hold on. You raised like 8 different issues with 8 different gripes. I mean, that's I go to.
Maybe that's how you get RFK.
Well, I mean, that's his challenge, right? Which is he's all over the place. But I want to go back to science, and I agree with Nina and I agree with John, and it's not that it's the Bible. Science is always changing. I mean, you're constantly evolving. But the process in this
country, really not the Bible? Because
no. The process by which our country is the best in the world at medical innovation. The best in the world. We have been for 100 years. The process by which we historically approve vaccines is rigorous. Take COVID out because, as Nina said, it was a totally unique circumstance. It is often 6 to 10 years, multiple trials, peer review. It's published, right? We put it out in the public, not China. That's not like Russia. It is everyone have at it in the medical community. And through this whole, going down this trail, you get a result. Are they always right? No, science is always evolving. But I think what's concerning from a political standpoint is there is a savagery of anti-expert that's pulsating through the world right now. Some of it's good, some of it's healthy, but it is sad to me that, as he said, hepatitis, polio, like there are a lot of good things. And if people start saying, like Florida now saying kids don't have to get any vaccines, that's scary. It's really scary.
Can I ask you a question, Dan?
Yep.
And I know that you kind of, because we're friends, and I know that you have people in your life who are kind of in this industry, and you clearly have a sincerely held opinion, and I believe that it's coming from a good place, obviously. So I want to ask you genuinely, where you just said there's like a huge wave, which I think I just enumerated on like 10 points, right, of skepticism. If it's all above, like it's where is this coming from? Why? Where does the sentiment come from, and why is it so common?
Well, look, I'll give you an example of, let's say, prostate cancer or colon cancer, right? There's an increase in colon cancer in this country. We don't know why. One of the views is people are now getting tested younger, right? So one of the things is, why are all these people in their 30s getting colon cancer? Well, in the past, no one tested for it until it was too late or they were much later in life, right? So as Dr. John said, we don't know. He gave a set of lists about why autism may be happening. It should be studied. But I go back to where Kennedy seems to be getting out over his skis. He is not great to question. Like, that's how innovation happens. Question why things are, why things, they don't have to be that way. But then you need to put up facts. Go study it. If he's got real data, don't be afraid to have it reviewed in the public. Don't be afraid to put it out there. But as Republicans said to him in the hearing today, you're not doing that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a reliance on the idea of questioning, which is something I hope we can all agree on is not only necessary, but there was too little of it in the past. The problem in so many ways is the answers that are provided, the answers, and if people are providing different answers, them being run out of town. I want to go to Aaron in Two-Way World, who has his hand up. Aaron?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you all so much. So, I mean, we have a lot of, contingent and multifactorial questions that are all sort of running into each other. I think in the end, we have to realize that these pandemics are going to keep happening. They do every 50 to 150 years in all our history, going back as far as we can record history. And we spent 5 years post, COVID, and we haven't confronted any resilience for the next pandemic. So I think that's important. And it's pretty clear, given the era of anti-science we're in, and we had a similar response in the 1920s and 30s, right? Remember the Scopes trial and all that? That didn't kind of come out of a vacuum, right? That came out of our experience in modern medicine and modern science. And in the end, if given another circumstance or 2020 again, there's really only 3 options. You let it rip, you completely close down so that you wait on a particular vaccine being developed while you do a World War II like effort to get a vaccine, or you do this sort of mushy hybrid thing, which is what we did. Those are the only three options. There's no fourth option. There's no alien landing victory party that you can construct that fixes all of this. So it's pretty obvious to me that the next pandemic, if it happens, if it's not 100 years from now, if it's in the next 10 to 30 years, we're going to let it rip. And likely these pandemics tend to be 2 to 4 times as more destructive from a fatality standpoint. So we're going to get 5 to 10 million dead in the US and a few hundred million worldwide. And then we'll have some mea culpa, oh my God, science, why don't we love science, blah, blah, blah. We'll go through this whole life cycle again. And remember that the 1918 pandemic, what made it very, very unique is it had what's called a W mortality, right? So it attacked a population under 5, it attacked a population 20 to 40, and it attacked elderly. So it skipped over these couple other key generations. And so if you get hit with that type of pandemic in the future, you'll get a wipeout of that. It's pretty obvious because we have so much more transmission vector today because of the way we live, right? The way we travel, the way we operate and trade, everything else. So I just think we have a disingenuous conversation in the end because we don't want to recognize that we're only given those 3 choices. And we can complain about masks and what's effective, what's not. That's like window dressing. In the end, are you for a full quarantine shutdown? Yes or no? Italian style going back, 1,000 years. Okay, you're not for that. Then it's let it rip, and let it rip are the consequences of let it rip, which is, and understand the number one consequence in the modern health system is your hospitals will be imploded, like structurally. And we don't want to talk about that supply chain component, which is the hospital system and the health system. And then you will have to militarize. That will be the only way out of this, so that you can bring back up your health capacity. And then you'll be forced into a quarantine.
Which is what they did during COVID. They ended it. The military had to get involved to set up makeshift, morgues and hospital beds. And
that's the mushy hybrid of not wanting to confront this. And I think the earlier question that Emma was asking, why are people like this? Because we're given all these complex contingent environments. Humans don't operate well in multivariate calculus, right? So then we're stuck with all these custom variables that we can't explain, right? One kid does well, one kid doesn't. Why? Inshallah, right? I mean, we have no way to figure that out. And we don't like that answer. We don't like that lack of control. And we don't trust any institutions now. And I think Trump just surfed on top of that. I think we were already there. We would get to some version of this anyways. And I think this is just going to lead to, either in our lifetimes or in a future lifetime, another massive pandemic, which will be probably 3 to 5 times worse. And it will be a historic kill factory event. And you'll be looking at hundreds of millions of dead worldwide. That'll be it. And then we'll be sitting there saying science needs to fix it. Okay, great. And we'll look back, we'll have traceability. People will be doing these longitudinal studies back to 2020 saying, oh, wow, people were kind of getting weird and against science in the 2020s. Why did that happen? Just like they did in the 1920s, the 1930s. And I think that's where I think it's inevitable. And there's no hack behind this thing. There's no fix.
Thank you, Aaron.
That's exciting.
Yeah, smart and depressing as usual. Thank you. I appreciate
That's how I roll.
It was great. It was great. But
leap out the window if I can do that. Just a kind of political question, and it kind of has to do with trust. I mean, I've said this over and over. I said it, on previous shows, but I've said it today too. That any of you, and I'm going to just say, jump in. Does anyone believe that there would be any utility in something like a Truth and Reconciliation Committee about COVID? Because we know now, I mean, one of the things that was so strange to me about COVID is how we process information. Everyone I knew was washing their damn groceries, and then one day they weren't. Like, there was no call that came out from DC that said, stop washing your groceries. It's insane. But people kind of figure this out. People were wearing gloves at the beginning.
Yeah, gloves at the grocery store.
Remember the gloves at the grocery store? Cloth masks. Well, those don't work. They're getting these trickles of information and kind of learning that way. But at the end of it, I think there's too much embarrassment from so many people. I mean, RFK was one who was supportive of the lockdowns on Twitter. I mean, he doesn't talk about that much more anymore, but a bunch of people were tweeting a bunch of his old stuff. But again, as you said, Dan, I accept that in a way because we're trying to figure things out. None of us knew what was happening. So is there Or is it too politically fraught and we're too polarized, to use that boringly cliche statement, that we can actually sit down and have a committee that says, okay, what did we do right and what did we do wrong? This was a once in a lifetime disruption. Think back to how disruptive and insane that period was. Yet it ended and we just all kind of walked away from it.
I mean, the non-elites have been, properly shamed for their incaution during the pandemic. I think it might be helpful to spread a little bit of that around. I think it's funny always to look back on, if you wanted to go to the two, places where what they did it was most at odds with what we now know to have been the right thing. You'd go to some, rural red state town where they're all like loving hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin, or you'd go to Columbia University's campus where there were very strict limitations on how many people could interact with each other, like triple masking on the basketball court. Actually, they didn't want you to engage in any sports or go outside or do anything. At the non-elite level and the most elite level, there were actually kind of equivalent failures. And that's really interesting to me, but it's not on the elite level. It's been hardly scrutinized, where there's plenty of, media criticism of what people think about ivermectin, which is wrong, which it was correct to be skeptical of that as a therapeutic and has not panned out, except that if you do have a parasitic worm and a COVID infection and you take ivermectin, you will, I think, probably recover from COVID faster because you'll cure the parasitic worm.
Well, the problem was that the people taking ivermectin weren't censoring the people wearing masks on social media and having the intelligence community consulting with social media companies.
Yeah.
I mean, or CNN saying that Joe Rogan was saying, take a horse pill or something. Just the condescending nature of it was.
They jumped all over for him for that, but no university president has been hauled onto CNN to explain why your, depressed, miserable, failed year of students is anything you're going to take blame for.
Well, and that's the thing, is that politically for the Democratic Party, we have not, and some candidates are starting to do it, publicly atoned for the mistakes we made. Best intentions, but we made mistakes. Shutting the schools down was a huge mistake in retrospect, right? Yeah. We get why they wanted to do it. We get how afraid teachers were, but it was a mistake. And I think that I can't see an environment, I don't know, Nina, if you disagree, where Democrats would trust the Trump administration, or the Trump Emma and MAGA would trust President Newsom, right? I can't see right now how both sides would think the books are cooked. You've preordained your outcome. But
that's part of the problem, though, Dan. That's part of the problem. Do we have to see every freaking thing through the lens of somebody's political ideology? That stuff is getting us killed mentally, spiritually, just decimated. You talk about a disease that's taken over. It is the disease of seeing every flipping thing through a partisan lens. And I gotta have a light moment here. Michael Avery put in the chat, I watched everything 2 ways, and he put 2 way. Ha ha ha, love that. Love that, Michael Avery. We needed that moment of levity. Michael, yeah, maybe truth and reconciliation, but it really depends on whether or not people truly want to get at truth and reconciliation.
Yeah. But I think that's right, Nina, also that everything being endlessly politicized, and I blame progressives for it. No, I'm joking.
Shame.
There's that moment where everything, and I'll tell you what, I did an interview on my two-way show with a really fascinating person, Ari Aster, who is the director of the movie Midsummer and the director of the new movie Eddington. And if anyone out there in 2A land has seen it,
I saw it. It's great.
What did you think? I mean, this was, I'll tell you a story about this, Robby. I went into the press screening for Eddington, and if no one has seen this, it's a movie, the first movie about COVID, about this sort of mania that gripped us all in COVID. Every sort of political ideology and everybody's skewered. It's not like a partisan movie in any way. But I went into the theater, and the woman sitting behind me, who was clearly a movie reviewer for the New Yorker or something, I'm not going to say who it was, but had a mask on, a big N95 mask. And the first scene was Joaquin Phoenix walking into a store and being kicked out because he didn't have a mask. He's the sheriff of the town. And it was the funniest. It was the only thing that I'd seen that was close to a Truth and Reconciliation Committee where he said, you know, I was skewering everyone in the madness that gripped us. But it is through also, as Nina says, through a political lens, because everything is ultimately through a political lens. I mean, for us, because we do political journalism, but also because it runs through the government and everyone's taking opposite sides of issues. Somebody in the chat said something that I thought was great. Sweden was a great example. I lived in Sweden. I speak Swedish. I comment in the Swedish media, and they were pilloried by everyone here for doing it wrong. And my friend Johan Norberg, the economist, has a great report that he wrote. He said, you know, I'm sorry, but we were kind of right about everything. And that's a good model for people to look at. And that's a political thing because the whole thing was politicized. But Robby, before we head out, what did you think of Eddington?
I have a review of it in the next edition of
Oh, you do?
Nice.
Actually, 10 seconds. I did not like it, but my brother and I saw it, and then we stayed up until 4 a.m. talking about it. So I give it an endorsement and encourage everyone to see it, even though I did not personally like it. It is an achievement to do something original and to reflect that time period. And it is well done, even though I didn't like it. And that's all I can say about it. It's great. It's great to see it, even though it is not a movie I liked. If that's a weird thing to say.
The next evergreen topic, movie reviews. The five of us. I like it.
Yes. I like it. And I'll tell you this, Robby. I watched it at the theater and I said, what the hell did I just see?
Yeah.
That was and I thought about it for a couple of days.
Well, now I got to watch it. All right.
Yeah, you should. Everyone should watch it.
We stayed up all night and got appallingly drunk talking about it. It was a great time.
I did that last night and I was by myself and didn't see a movie. So, you know, we all have our things, but Nina doesn't drink and we're going to try to work on that. But I want to thank all of you out in 2A land for joining us today. We had a couple of other things in the docket, but this conversation was so fascinating and so interesting. And you guys were so great that we extended it for the whole hour. You know where to go. Out in social media land. I'm so dumb about this stuff. You know, just go to the 2A YouTube channel and all that stuff. This is where I sound like an old man. And we will be back this time next week. Hey, this is my first time, so you got to tell me.
Great job, Michael. You did a great job.
Next week, is that right?
Awesome. Yeah. We'll be here next Thursday, 4 p.m.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
great job, community.
Appreciate Emma Jo, Dan, the Honorable Nina Turner, and my old pal, Robby Soave. And I want to thank all of you for joining us on the group chat. We'll see you next time.